is feel the fear and do it anyway. And John has had to put a copyright sign against it because he got a nice email from someone to say, that's actually the name of our thing. They've kind of, who do we need to credit, John? We need to say thank you to someone, don't we?
It's somebody called Susan Jeffers, who's from the States. She's not alive anymore, but a trustee of her estate contacted me and said, if you're using this in connection with a workshop, you need to credit it. So I said, that's fine. So
there you go.
We felt the fear and did it anyway.
Yeah, we felt the fear.
It's a book. It's a well-known book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, just shamelessly stealing people's names. Excellent. So we're going to talk today about how to de-risk digital and make progress. I think it's an area, and John kind of makes this point in the description of it, where people immediately think about cybersecurity and think about safeguarding, but actually today we're going to talk much more broadly about risk taking, and particularly, and we'll talk a wee bit in a second about the guest speaker we've got, from a governance and strategy level. What does that look like? What does it mean to actually take risks? And how do you decide what to do first? How do we know if something's good value? What are the risks when we work with external suppliers? What are the risks when we don't keep a project on track and we damage that relationship with our funder or with government? So we're going to hear from John, who lots of you have heard lots of times before, but John manages SCVO's Digital Evolution Programme. John is also a charity trustee. He's supported hundreds of Scottish charities to take a broader view of their digital capability and think about what they do next. And our other guest is Raymond O'Hare. So Raymond was former Microsoft director. So Raymond spent over 12 years working in a variety of roles across Microsoft. And he was also the company's director in Scotland. He's also worked for the last 11 years as an independent chairman, non-exec director, and a board advisor to lots of startups and tech companies in Scotland and the UK. Raymond's also the chair of Enable Group. So it's Enable Group's Technology and Change Board. So for those of you who are not Scotland-based, Enable are one of the largest care provider charities. I'm sure Raymond will talk a wee bit about that. And probably one of the more forward-thinking charities in terms of using digital, and that's probably reflected in some of the people that they've got on their board, and Raymond will probably chat a wee bit about that as well. So, who am I handing over first, John? I know we had a brief chat, and then it went in one ear and out the other. I can't remember.
I think we thought Raymond might start because Raymond has to get away a few minutes before the end. So if we get him up and going early on, that may be easier. So you happy with that, Raymond?
Yeah, that's fine, John and Ross. Yep. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this DigiShift session. As already been said, Raymond O'Hare is my name. I currently am the chair of the Technology and Change Board at Enable Group. What that really means is basically, it means a couple of things. One, there's a lot of change going on at the moment. There's a lot of digital transformation going on at the moment and a whole load of different levels, which I'm happy to talk about depending on how interested you are in certain parts of it. But it's also under my sort of remit is the whole digital strategy in terms of where are we going with digital, what are we trying to achieve. The ultimate goal for us always really has got to be how are we helping the people that we serve, the people, our customers, for want of a better expression. What are we going to do to equip our teams to actually work better with them, and maybe to help them use devices, use technology as well. So we're really focused on how do we go on that journey. There's lots of things. It's not just simply about giving people devices all over the place. There's a whole load of things need to be done in that. So my remit really is chairing this change board, obviously, where all of the kind of major projects and things happen, but also being responsible for the whole digital strategy at Enable and our data strategy and our innovation strategy. So it's all wrapped up in that. As Ross said, I spent pretty much most of my working life really in or around the technology sector, working for some of what would have been the largest technology companies on the planet, and there's been lots of rationalization there. Lots of them were bought by other ones, etc. But probably the most recent ones, I spent almost 13 years actually at the Microsoft Corporation, doing a variety of different things, a variety of different roles, UK-wide, otherwise, more technical, technology focused, some more marketing, sales and marketing, and then into management side of things. I also sat on the company had a global small business board, actually, obviously over in its headquarters in Redmond, and I was on that board as well. Latterly, as Ross said, I've probably spent the last 11 years acting as either an independent chairman or an independent non-executive director or advisor to a variety of different boards. a lot of them in the technology space, really usually kind of high growth businesses, which were, businesses that were really ambitious, looking to really, really grow significantly. And I would have advised them on their business strategy, on their digital strategy in some cases, and around governance. A big thing, I spend a lot of my time on a number of the boards that I'm on, focusing on governance and just basically how do we do things properly? How do we follow the rules of the company, of the regulators, of all the various different things that you have to do? So I spend a fair amount of time doing that as well. For those of you who don't know, I mean, Enable is probably a well-known name in Scotland, but it's a I would say probably a leading Scottish charity, generating income probably of almost £60 million, over 12,000 members and supporters across Scotland. And I think we're now probably operating all of Scotland, across all of Scotland's local authorities, all 32 of them. We kind of do this based on three main pillars. There's Enable the charity itself, which is obviously all about campaigning, fundraising, and also very much about the promotion of self-advocacy for individuals with learning disabilities, and obviously running various charitable and community projects. We have Enable Works, which is a very interesting, very successful employability arm of the charity, which is about helping people with learning disabilities to get into sustainable employment and training and so on. So that's another key aspect of the charity. And the third one is an area called Enable All, which provides health and social care to people with learning difficulties or additional support needs and their families. And that's probably the largest part now of the charity in terms of the finance, if you look at it from a financial point of view. And that's really driven by what we have as a very innovative PA model, personal assistant model, which kind of supports this whole push and this whole drive to human rights-based care and self-directed care and support. So it's very much about sort of focusing on that and making sure that the individuals that we're working for are in control, are choosing. They get to actually be as active citizens as they possibly can be in the communities that they want to live in, whether that be with their families or around that area or so on. So this is a great this session's a great idea, and I appreciate it can be a, for particularly for smaller charities, and I don't say that in any disrespectful way, but I appreciate it can be quite a lonely and confusing place to be when you maybe sometimes have a limited budget, when you have maybe limited resources and expertise at your disposal, particularly in the digital and technology areas. Knowing what to do, if anything, I think as was mentioned in the brief on this, it's a daunting decision to have to make, to actually take a step. Sometimes even if you want to take the step, it can be quite difficult to persuade your boards, your board of trustees, to actually want to take that step with you. So there's, hopefully we'll get into some conversations today specifically about how do we do that? What are the areas the safest areas to get into? As John and Ross said, it's not just all about cyber security. Those are really important things, but there are other things that we have to balance as well to allow the charity and the organisation to function properly, to function better. So I think the themes of today's session, I know John's going to probably talk through them a little bit just now, but the themes are really good, really important, and hopefully we can have some practical conversations. And please feel free to ask questions on this. One thing I would say up front, actually, I mentioned it to John earlier. I mean, Enable, we understand we are probably a reasonable sized charity, and that, yeah, we have the luxury, I suppose, of being able to hire people with expertise in some of these areas, which makes our life a little bit easier in that respect. But I think it's really important we're willing to share that knowledge, share that experience with the rest of the sector, and we're happy to do that. I mean, it's not always, I'm not saying that we're going to come and give you a perfect technology or digital strategy, but even if it's a case that you're thinking of making a decision maybe about something, or you're about to take a step and you'd just like to ask somebody else or bounce it off somebody else, we're here and willing to actually have that conversation. Say we can't tell you exactly what to do, but we're willing to sort of try and share our expertise, our experience, what we've done right, what we've done wrong, actually the lessons we've learned as well, and make that available to as many of you as we can. So I'll probably shut up at this stage, John, and just hand back. I think I'm handing back over to you at this stage, and we can obviously get into some questions and discussions as the session goes on.
Great. Thank you very much, Raymond. That's a really interesting kind of reflection to start us off with. And I think that theme that you're highlighting there towards the end of sharing with other people and sharing experiences, that's really, really important, because other organizations, everybody's learning stuff, and it's when we share that can help us make some more progress. So I got a few little slides. I've done that because I like to think in terms of little pictures. I know Ross sometimes says we shouldn't be having slides in a DigiShift. He's going to shake his head now. But I've made some, so I'm going to share them. So first of all, I was thinking about how you get to growing to flowing. And you might often think the lowest risk thing to do is to do nothing. You're not spending any money, you're not doing anything, but actually when things are changing very rapidly, doing nothing is actually quite a risky place to be. And during the pandemic, everybody did something quick and dirty. So we all tried out little experiments. And that was absolutely the right thing to do because it enabled us to try out ideas, but we maybe need to think about the long term. And sometimes to make progress, you might buy in expertise or a product. And there's some areas like maybe your core IT infrastructure where that makes a lot of sense because there's organizations there that have expertise and it works really well. But the downside of that can be sometimes that expertise can be a bit of a black box. So it can be hard to really understand it and set the direction for it very well. I think for me, the kind of pinnacle to get to is really about learning and growing internal capacity. So if you've got good understanding within your organization, you're going to make better decisions about which products to buy, and you'll be able to put user needs at the heart of what you do all the time. So that's my kind of rough sketch of where I think you might want to get to. Others may have different views. I'd love to hear them. The next thing I wanted to talk about really briefly is about how to focus your efforts, because as Raymond was saying, digital change can be really daunting. So how do you know where to start? And this is a really common question I get when I'm talking to charities one-to-one. There's often about 10 things they want to fix at the same time. And a really useful resource for this that I'm sure some of you have seen before is the effort versus user value matrix from Lean methodology. So to make it easy, I've highlighted in green where you want to be, which is looking for things that are easy to deliver, but give high user value. So think about the pain points where things aren't working well in your digital systems. That's a really important starting point because you'll see some progress really early on. Conversely, I would avoid things that are low user value, even if they're low effort, because they can be distractions. So maybe somebody on your board says, I'd love it if there was a nice purple background on the website, or I'd love it if we had some VR capability in our website. Avoid the distracting stuff. Just stay focused on what's going to deliver for your users in a day-to-day basis. And obviously the black quadrant is definitely avoid stuff that's high effort and low user value, because that's going to waste a lot of time and resource. And in the yellow quadrant, we've got things that are high user value, but could be high effort to deliver. And I wouldn't say don't do those, but I'd say do them with a bit of caution and measure as you go along so that you're not committing 6 months and tens of thousands of pounds, but you're kind of testing it at a smaller scale first. So that's not new, I'm sure, to some of you, but I think it's a really helpful model to have in mind as you approach these things. Now, the next thing I just wanted to quickly talk about is about time as money, because often a big challenge that's front of mind with digital is, well, we don't have a dedicated budget for this, so how are we going to do it? And I've made a little worked example here. This is fictional, but it's based on real life organizations. Say you've got the Muddle Through Trust, which is a little organization. They've got about 5 or 6 employees. Their staff salary bill is about 150,000 per year. If their IT systems don't work, they might be losing 30 minutes per team member per day. I don't think there's many organizations that are doing that every week, but I think there are some where they have real problems with their IT. That means that's 6% of your working time out the window, because it's people looking at computers that are maybe frozen or systems aren't saving things properly. And also, if you're trying to help each other in an ad hoc way, that can stop a colleague's time because they need to stop what they're doing and try and help you figure out what's going wrong. On the other side, we've got Managing Well, SCVO. They're the same size, but they spend a bit of money on a managed IT service. That costs them more money, but because their staff team are just able to get on with what they want to do, they're actually more productive. So it's a fictional example, but I just wanted to illustrate the benefit of a bit of investment on the IT front. Another quick example to do with an appointment booking service. A lot of organizations I talk to are beginning to explore the possibility of automating online booking systems. And maybe before doing that, they'll have a lot of manual processes to support appointment booking. So maybe if they've got 100 appointments being booked every month, that might be 2 days of a staff member's time. And there might be lots of headaches around rebooking the appointment and that kind of thing. So it could be hundreds of pounds in terms of costs. If they used an online service, that might cost them £40 a month. There's like SMS reminder services that cost like 4p a text or something like that. So there is a cost there, but huge time saving. So that's just kind of quick example of how you could build a mini service. And yes, you'd have to allocate a bit of money to do it, but you would save some money in the long run. So that's my quick reflections. I just kind of thought I'd introduce a few of those themes to say risk and cost is often a bit multidimensional. It's not just a kind of straightforward saving. So are we opening up now to a bit more general discussion, Ross, would you say?
Yeah, I think, you know, something just as a starter before we even open up, I'd be really interested to know for everyone in the room, like what do you actually quantify or cost in your organization, and what do you not quantify in cost? Because just like that, I mean, like that example you gave is like the classic thing where it's like, we can't afford the £25 a month fee for Calendly or whatever the tool is you end up using. And then when you do some work with them, you realize there's those 200 hours that are crept up because they've not chosen to use that tool. And I'd be really interested, just I guess honesty from people in the room is like, what are the kind of things where nobody is costing or quantifying it, and what do those look like? It doesn't need to just be people and time, it could be other things. Does anyone want to share? Does anyone want to be brutally honest and tell us? You're all amazing and you've all quantified all your stuff. Everything's just
Shall I maybe ask another question back to the room in case?
No, I want to answer that one.
All right, okay, you're going to do the. We're going to.
Maybe it's the YouTube fact. Maybe the YouTube factor.
Ah, fair enough. That's a good point.
Yeah. I'll jump in.
Go on, Bobby. Thank you.
Quite often it's about so I run a lot of workshops, and a lot of the time I don't factor in the time spent to sell the workshop, and then kind of build the workshop as well. And so obviously you're doing a lot of work for free. So the kind of what I'm doing at the moment is focusing on what I can automate out of that process, how I can kind of monetize some of that time, but also how I can make the most of that time. So reusing some of the stuff that I developed for those workshops as well. So it's not, yeah, I'm trying, but it can be quite difficult to realize what you're not doing.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think that's like, there's a couple of good things in there. It's just like that notion of automation is just really, really important. And also that, I guess, repeating the kind of core things that work and having those building blocks. There's a really good, I say it's really good. I mean, it's like one of these business books that you buy in an airport. What's it called? It's called, is it, Raymond, you might have read this because you're probably sad like me and have read these books. Is it called The E-Myth? Is that what the book's called? It's like one of the biggest selling books at the time. And it's about that, even if you're not a franchised organization, and even if you're one person, is like thinking of yourself as a franchise and how you'd bake in those building blocks and that repeatability. But something that I've seen in a lot of charities is like they describe stuff as being person-centered, which is good. But then when they apply that to processes, they're like, we don't have processes. And you're like, well, that's ridiculous. Of course you've got processes. They're like, well, everything we do is so bespoke for every person. I'm like, so literally you go to your work and every single thing is like starting from scratch again. And it's there's that danger, I think, where we muddle up those two things and we think being person-centered means that we don't have any processes, we don't learn, we don't iterate, we don't repeat the same building blocks of change. I don't know if
having a process doesn't stop it from being bespoke either, does it?
Exactly. Yeah.
You can have a process to get to delivering that bespoke. You know, there's certain questions that you're going to have to ask every time. to find out about that bespoke need. And there will be things that are repeated. The more bespoke things you create, the more you can process it.
Yeah, I think there's also an interesting thing here. One of the things that we've tried to do is like say to everybody in the organisation, think digital. And I know that's sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it's almost like there is a tendency, just human nature being what it is, that if you're confronted with a problem or any kind of challenge, there's a tendency to kind of default to what you would normally do, how you would normally fix it, then maybe the roundabout way that you would go around that. And I know it's not, you can't just constantly be challenging everything that gets done, but there is a way of saying, well, you know, actually, do we have to do it this way? Is there a way of actually sort of using something that we've already got, or maybe something that we could buy that would actually just speed that up? It would take, you know, like looking at your examples, John, it would say, it would actually save you half a day a week, or it would save you whatever it was. So almost like trying to encourage everybody involved in the organisation just to think constantly, and it's not something you can't just tell people to do it and they'll do it. It's a constant, almost culture change to make people think in those terms. But I think it's really worth trying to do, actually, because people start to become more innovative and start to sort of, you know, once the penny drops, people start to say, do you know what, this is a daft way of doing things. Actually, I've seen, or a friend of mine has this, and it saves them huge amounts of time. You start getting ideas coming into the organisation about what would practically work and practically help it.
Yeah. And I think there's something in there about kind of recruiting staff and staff retention. I'm doing some work with quite a small housing association at the moment, and they're quite nimble. They're quite a small staff team. They don't use a huge amount of digital to do much of their work at all. And one of the things that we've been exploring with them is if I saw a job with them and I thought, I'm going to move from a big housing association like Wheatley Group or Glasgow Housing Association, and I want to work with a smaller organisation, and I come on board and I'm onboarded, and I realise I'm going to get a paper wage slip, and I realise that if I want to know my toil, it's going to involve 3 Word documents, and I might get to know it next week. And if I want to collaborate with someone, I can't do it. We're going to have a meeting if we want to do that. And if I want to chat to you, I'm going to have to send you an email. And it's all those things that people expect as an employee in 2021. And if you come into your organisation and your organisation doesn't feel like that, what does that do to your recruitment and your retention of staff? So I think, like, even for those organisations that don't want to do it because they don't want to think about being nimble and getting the most out of their staff and the money that people have donated or they're getting through grants programs, is actually like getting the right people and keeping the right people. It's critical. John,
William had a quick question there, I think.
Sure. And we've got one from Amanda as well in the chat. After that, so. William, you seem to be, your audio's gone. While William's getting his audio, he has like the most amazing webcam I've ever seen. I don't know how he's managed to blur the background. So that is I want to know that before you ask a question.
There we go. Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, perfect.
The camera's great. The microphone needs to be manually turned on.
Can you tell me what kind of webcam it is?
It is actually it's an EOS. It's a Canon EOS camera.
I'll explain it.
You can use Canon DSLRs as webcams now. They've released a patch for that. Yeah, so if you haven't got the camera in it. Sorry. Yeah, just to speak to that, I think it's interesting how you bring that in as an issue with staff retention. We've got an in-house development team. We're a bird science charity, so we run lots of data entry applications for people to go out and do field work and enter their data. So we're lucky to have an in-house team, and so we do a lot of development of business processes and systems ourselves. But crucially, we don't have a distinct customer and user support team. And so while we've acknowledged the cost of our development team handling user support, we haven't acknowledged the cost of that disruption. So that's a hidden cost in terms of, you can put time down to, okay, I was spending time on user support on a regular basis every day or every week, but you have that noise of like switching between active development, and then you have to go off and deal with some customer issue. And that switching in itself is like an additional hidden cost, because that's, that just dips your productivity while you're doing it. And we're only just getting to grips with that idea that, look, we actually need to separate out the teams and work in a more segmented way. So we have clear roles around user support and have a system to handle that. And so that's actually driven some of the motivation to actually spend some money on an actual service desk system, because this kind of user support was also just bleeding out all over the organization and getting pinged around all over the place. But it wasn't until we actually just got to the grips of it. It's not just a case of this person can do X, Y, and Z, and they're very different jobs. as long as we can put time down against it. It's actually that kind of strain of having to manage, you know, too wide a breadth of skill sets, I suppose.
It's really interesting, and I think loads of organizations will be in that stage of having to flex where their capacity is as things have changed. But should we pick up Amanda's question now? Because I think it's a very interesting one. So Amanda was asking about, there's so many tools, how do you make sure you're investing in the right ones? And that's, you know, a very, very common dilemma. And I think there's kind of two thoughts I would offer. So I think the first is, going back to Raymond's point, is talking to other charities, seeing what they're using. And if you can get a chance to see something in action, that's really helpful. The other thought I think is, if it's more of a kind of micro investment, like, you know, which online platform do we commit to a regular payment on, is maybe to box off some time. So not saying somebody's going to experiment forever, but saying over a week or a couple of weeks, you try out a few, try and get a kind of MVP or prototype so that you can see some users interacting with it. And then you can see what's going to happen next. I've shoved a link in the chat to the Catalyst service recipes, because that's a really interesting resource. So it's basically a compendium of case studies where charities have solved a user need. So like, how do I book an appointment? How do I do a counseling session online? How do I offer advice to people that have low digital skills, whatever it might be? And what's really nice about it is it's all organized around what the problem is people are trying to solve, but it has the whole kind of the story, you know, what ingredients did they use to solve this? So that's a great resource to look at. So those are my quick thoughts on that. I don't know, Raymond, if you want to chip in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think your advice around, if possible, talk to others who may have gone through the same journey or have, you know, already done that. That's definitely sound advice. And you know, as I said earlier on, if that even means a call to enable actually to see, you know, has anybody experienced some of these things? We're happy for you to do that. I think the other thing is, depending on what it is you're looking for, if it's a specific product for whether it's appointment booking or whether it's CRM or whether it's, you know, whatever. A lot of the products that exist out there actually do offer a kind of 14-day free trial or 30-day free trial. And I appreciate, as John says, it takes time to go through that. But I think it's quite, if you can allocate and time box out some, you know, some space for people to actually try that out. If people are really struggling with something like that at the start in a free trial, if you like, and if they've actually dedicated a couple of days to it and they're getting nowhere, the chances are it's not going to be a particularly good solution for you if it's, you know, if it's requiring at that stage some real, you know, help and assistance to do it. So my view would be, like, try a couple of these things out. I mean, if you look, I mean, there's so much stuff online, obviously, but, you know, if you look at specific areas, whether it be finance systems, whether it be CRM, whether it be, you know, appointments, or it be other kind of booking systems or whatever, there's a lot of stuff out there on the web, and it can quite easily be sort of filtered. A lot of the noise can be filtered out of it. I think there's, you know, there's a couple of basic rules, you know, about, I would say, particularly if you're a smaller organization, you know, you want to avoid having on-premise or in-house systems. You really want to be actually looking at cloud. And I think, to be honest, depending on who you choose in those kind of situations, I think cloud answers some of those security and cyber worries that people have, because whether if it's Google or Microsoft or AWS or Xero or any of these people have put a lot of time and effort and a lot of money into that side of it. And while it's not completely foolproof in that regard, you're kind of protecting yourself if you look to some of those kinds of organizations, I think, to sort of, you know, base, if you're looking at those kinds of decisions. If it's something more unusual or something a bit more niche, you do probably have to sort of just try and talk to any other. I mean, at the moment, even in Enable, actually, we've got some big areas that we're actually looking at the moment. And on the face of it, there's some obvious products that we should just go and buy. One of them we should go and buy, if you like, and do it, because on the face of it, it just looks like it's absolutely right for everything we want to do. But we actually have gone through a bit of a process of talking to people who've been through the process of deploying that particular product and getting some feedback from them. And while their overall impression was it was good, it works, it does a good job for us, there was a lot of information that we found out in those conversations that proved to us, do you know what, that's not going to fit. That's not going to fit the way that we work in certain areas. And whereas, the obvious thing was, it was like a magnet. It was drawing everybody to it because it's a big name. Everybody's convinced that it's the right thing to do. But just some conversations and the right kind of questions proved to us that it may still be something we'll consider, but our situation has changed now as a result of those finding out that information from other people who've been through the process. So I think that applies everywhere. One thing I just want to also go back to the point that William made, actually. I think every organization I've ever been involved with has that challenge of not not maybe being able to, particularly as it's growing or if it's a certain size, you can't have somebody in every single role in every single sort of area that is dedicated to that, and so therefore you end up sort of poaching people out of other areas. But there is a real danger, there is a real cost to that, because you're diluting effort and you're diluting sort of the impact across a number of areas by doing it. And it's not an easy problem to solve if you don't have the resources and the money to do so. But it is a real challenge, and I think sometimes it slips under the radar as just something we have to do. Often it's worthwhile stopping and saying, is that the right thing? These guys who are doing this really highly valuable situation over here, and we're actually then sort of pulling sort of 20% of the time or 30% of the time to do something that's arguably maybe slightly lower value or maybe lower impact. Should we really be doing that? Probably not. So I think it's something that everybody in any size of organization should try and keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, so often you end up in that kind of struggling on kind of scenario where you haven't quite optimized the system, so you're spending a lot of time trying to help people use it. And that can often be, I guess, a sort of signal to you if you're talking across your team and saying, well, look, we had to help 20 people with this kind of situation in the last couple of months. That's maybe a sign that it's time to take a step back and do some changes or tweaks.
Yeah, I was at a board meeting recently, actually, where one of the senior people was reporting in on the progress on a particular area, particularly important area, actually, to the organisation. And basically, the bottom line was that they hadn't done anything. They hadn't made any progress in this particular area. But the reason they hadn't done it is because a whole load of different people had actually taken a piece of that individual's time to help them sort out a problem that really should have been sorted out properly, either through the process or through whatever in other parts of the organisation. And so the net effect was that nobody was happy. Nobody really got anything near what they wanted done out of it. So I think it's maybe an extreme example, but I think it's relevant to every organisation, and it's particularly acute for some small organisations where you can't have all of the resources that you'd like to dedicate to different, specific different areas.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting talk. Just going back a wee bit, because Raymond, I think you said something very interesting about empowering your staff to experiment a bit and try new stuff. Because there's this balance to get right. Because I suppose if you happen to be in the kind of imaginary charity where everything was a test all the time, it would probably be a bit crazy. But equally, if you're in the charity that never tested anything, you'd still be using like pens and paper and didn't have any telephones. So it's like that kind of, you want to find the balance. And I suppose maybe part of what you could do at a structural level is say, well, give everybody a bit of time, or say, well, take one strand of what you're working on and make that a test, so that you're actually focusing on that and saying, can we change this? Are we doing this in the right way? Because that could help, as you say, unlock that innovation and people start thinking about things in a very different way.
Yeah, I think it's your point, John, as well, about innovation is not just about massive technological innovation. Innovation can exist in every single job, in every single part of the organization. And again, it's part of that kind of, if you can create a culture where, it's about think differently, think digitally, think about, even just at a very basic level, how can you do this job a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently than you currently do it? What's the one thing that you could maybe change? Most people are capable of actually coming up with something that streamlines it even a little bit. And, that can lead on to other things, and then lead on to other slightly more radical ways of doing things, which are beneficial for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to pick up that point as well, I think it's like people's interpretation of what innovation is so wildly different.
Yeah,
It's important to have shared language about that in your organisation. I think one of the things I come across a lot, and I don't know, like Bobby, if you'll agree with the work that you're doing, is like people immediately when you mention digital, first of all, there's that rush to the technological solution, but they're like, we need to do something that's groundbreaking and really innovative. And it's like, well, you probably don't, because you're a small charity who has 4 staff and no budget, probably what you need to do is reuse something that we know works elsewhere. And actually there's such a focus on this kind of weird version of innovation that people are not going and looking at what other charities are doing and building on that success or remixing how that works. I'm going to put, there's a link in the chat, which is CAST's kind of digital services principles, and one of them is understand what's out there first. And I guess if I'm a board of trustees, well, I'm on a board of trustees, I don't know why I'm saying if I wasn't a board of trustees, I am on a board. And someone came to me and said, right, we've got this really innovative idea and we're going to do this thing. Like, first of all, I mean, the test would be like, what's the user research you've done that needs that, but also like, what is out there already, rather than like, we're going to go to an IT provider because they want to sell us a thing at 80 grand that they tell us will work and is really innovative. Like, that just rings massive alarm bells. But actually, for a lot of people, it's like, that's the thing we should be aspiring to, which is a really ridiculous way of running an organisation. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, anyone like Bobby or Raymond or John.
I think it also goes the other way. Quite often I encounter the digital's not what I do. I can't be digital as well. So the kind of empowerment is about, one, giving the opportunities, but also giving learning and confidence building opportunities like this, like, you know, sharing peer learning in your organisation and trying to encourage people to understand that digital innovation or innovation in itself is just about thinking outside the box quite often, about seeing, okay, why am I filling out 5 different forms to get one thing done? Why on our website are we asking people to email us to book into a event that they could just book in through an online app that's already out there? It's about questioning in its essence, I think, and until people understand that it's just about being curious and asking questions, the confidence is something that we'll struggle with.
Yeah, that's a fair point, I think, actually, because you're right. This is about people at the end of the day as well, obviously, and making sure that, you know, people feel, one, that they're empowered to do it and that people have the confidence in them, but also to help them build their own confidence up as they go along. And that's not necessarily an easy thing. I think also that just picking up on Ross's point, if you're already using technology in any shape or form, there's a high probability, really high probability, that you're probably not using more than about 20% of the value of it and the impact of it. And I think it's one of the things that enable, actually, that we're doing. Everybody thinks, oh, you know, like there's a kind of tendency to think, oh, it's just all about get new stuff, get new things in, do it. If you look at what's there, and we're looking at this at the moment and saying, we could get so much more value of this stuff that's already basic stuff. I'm not talking about really fancy technology, just basic things. We could, if we just, and that's partly to do with the people thing and about making sure people have got the right training and development and the right focus on it. But doing that will probably yield significant benefits to most organizations, actually, just by using what they already have technology-wise, smarter, a little bit greater extent. So I think that shouldn't be, it's not all about just finding new stuff. It is absolutely about sort of optimizing and sort of maximizing what you've got within the organization as it stands.
That's really interesting, Raymond. I'm new to the sector. I spent 37 years in the corporate world. I'm still an exec director of one of Scotland's professional football clubs, where digital is part of my agenda as well.
Right.
So I'm finding this whole kind of journey. I'm 8 weeks into the sector. I'm finding it quite interesting, and I think your last point was very, very well observed. What I find is that we perhaps have a wide dearth of technology, of platforms, but we don't have the capability and we're not utilising fully. Yeah. And the immediate knee-jerk reaction seems to be, well, we need to have something else, or we need to augment it, or we need to create our own process to bolt onto it. Whereby if we go back to the provider, perhaps invest some money in terms of additional training and support, we'll probably find that the tool or resource has the capability, and we can drive further efficiencies, streamline the number of systems that we have, and on an aggregate basis be more efficient and more agile in our operation. So yeah, that's really been really interesting. Perhaps I will pick up with you. We operate within a similar sector, so that we may have a follow-up conversation at some point, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all.
Thank you.
It's a great question from Katia. Katia, I wonder if you wanted to speak to your question at all, because I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's more of a point, really. about, well, we've kind of been looking at implementing e-commerce on our website for quite a while, and basically we had looked at what colleagues were doing. We were like, right, well, we'll land on Stripe because we know that they've had positive experience of using it. So doing all the right things in terms of, right, what are other people doing? We're taking off-the-shelf product that we can implement. But for me, it was really tough because it's sort of that thing of like, well, you're the default digital person, like you go away and look into it. And then when I was kind of coming up with faced with sort of challenges or questions, I was like, I've got no idea who to turn to about the next bit about how we implement it and stuff. So I think there definitely is a balance, because if you've got equally people around you who are like, well, I don't know, but who knows, everyone's doing the like who knows kind of dance around what actually is the next step. So as much as I totally agree, it's great to empower your staff to go away and experiment this, exactly as Bobby's saying, frameworks and governance, and making sure that somebody else is involved in those decision-making processes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think on the testing front, I think probably the key is to set a kind of some like guardrails and say, what are we testing today? So what you wouldn't want is for employee to be sent away for a few months at a time to do some big massive thing and then come back with it sink or swim. It's much more about breaking it down. And actually, because you mentioned e-commerce, is reading a book recently by a guy called Alan Kelly. It's about OKRs, and he has a lovely example of doing e-commerce. He said, if you were on a software team and you had to sell something online later that same day, you wouldn't build a store, you'd open an eBay account. So there's a kind of idea that depending on how quickly you want to test something, you can do it in a very granular way, or you can, the next thing you might test is, could we take one card payment? And then it might be about how do we set Stripe up the right way? And you can gradually add little features on bit by bit. I think the other thing I'd probably do in that situation is at an operational level, have a bit of a cross-disciplinary team together. So it sounds like you probably want somebody from the finance side, somebody from marketing or comms or fundraising, so that it's not just a go and do something digital. Because if you don't have those inputs about where's the money going to go, or what's the marketing going to look like, you can't do it on your own, right? But,
well, the challenge is that I'm all of those people in our organization.
Right.
So
yeah.
I can
Talk to
make
yourself.
it a bit tough. Yeah, exactly. Okay, what do you think? Well, this is the issue. I think, again, being in such a small team, it's like, where do you steal the other people from?
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, Katy, because I was automatically going to say to you there, but you must involve the other people from these areas. But given you are all of those people from all of those areas, that is a challenge. I'll give you that, I have to say. But yeah,
I was just going to say, as someone who's been all of those people from all of those areas, reaching out to others in other organisations that are those people, just for kind of a bit of sense checking, is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Because you can't do it. It's too difficult to be. That's a very lonely place actually to be, and you need as Bobby's saying, actually, even if it's external situations, but somebody has to give you a little bit of context here and a little bit of comparison. That's just so important, actually.
I mean, I've quite often just put something out on Twitter and said, like, this is my situation, what do I do? And people are lovely and do quite often come back and give you some really good advice.
Yeah. And one exercise as well, it can be quite useful, is thinking about your riskiest assumptions. So what you don't know, because quite often you'll maybe begin a project thinking about, well, we know this, we know that, so these are the definite things we're going to run with. But if you can summarize your don't knows, because sometimes there'll be don't knows that relate to users, like we don't know whether users want this or not, or we don't know how they'll engage with it. But maybe some of them are don't knows about, like, what's the goal for this? Have we got a financial figure we want to see, or and summarizing those, and particularly sharing with more senior people, can be really helpful, because that's focusing their minds on what's going to be a bit of a gamble. And there will be some of them where you'll be able to clear it up and say, right, we can do a little bit of research and turn this don't know into have a pretty good guess about. But there may be others where you think, well, we don't really know at all, but so we'll do some testing to discover what those are. That could be helpful.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just, Katia, can I just ask, is there anybody you kind of on an ongoing basis that you have a kind of relationship with, you know, whether either somebody else in the organization or in another organization that you would have a kind of regular dialogue with? I'm not a mentor and things like is a great thing if you can have somebody in that sort of kind of position, but do you have somebody, a kind of go-to person that you do trust, and even if they don't know all of the specifics of what you're doing?
Not one person that I would jump to mind immediately. Right, okay. Like probably some of the board members I would ask, but not on this subject. But right. Definitely, I know I can approach the board about, you know, different things. So yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. Is kind of thinking around that kind of external, having that support.
Because there will be other people in your position, in your situation, and it's probably, even whether maybe you just need an introduction to somebody who, or I don't know if there's anybody on this particular forum, but you know, even having a conversation with somebody like every once a month or something, it's quite an interesting way of sharing some of the challenges and sharing some of the sort of the bits that are kind of causing you some trouble. I find one of the things I would always do actually on various different boards actually would be when you've got individuals, particularly individuals maybe coming into a position, a senior position, maybe new or relatively new, is find a network, find some kind of network. If it doesn't exist in the company, find it somewhere, you know, to help them find it somewhere else and start building that up, because that can become a really helpful source of comfort in some ways, and sort of just basically testing things a little bit. So if it's possible.
Yeah, well, normally I would pester Ross, but he's like the busiest, and I know
Well, maybe you need to like put some e-commerce stuff on that's very appealing to Ross, and then make him use your prototype. But yeah, Bobby's just really helpfully linked to the digital charity Slack, and I think Ross may have a link to a few other online forums as well.
Oh yeah,
and I think he's maybe forgotten he's done it. It's such a nice little hub. Yeah, but I think it's such a, and I think if you find those communities, I a good while ago I worked in fundraising, and where you find those networks, they're so fruitful because there's always somebody who's done the same thing a few months ahead of you, and they'll usually have a lot of really helpful insight. And I think, as Raymond says, it's often when they can share what not to do or what to avoid that can be really productive, because they can explain, well, we tried this and it didn't work because X, Y, Z, and that gives you a great saving in terms of time. And Ross is linked to his site now in chat, so there's a few good networks there.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice from Raymond. Is if you feel, and I think like Kai's not alone. There's a lot of charities that like that is the case, and particularly where charities have not invested much in digital, it tends to not just be it's one person, but it's like an eighth of one person's role, and so that investment is so tiny compared to the commercial sector. I think as well, like that decision making stuff, it's like, it's all very fine and well going to a board and a board ratifying something, but if the board doesn't understand it, and Katie goes to the board and the board just goes, well, I don't know, like, you're the digital person, yep, rubber stamp. It's like, where does that accountability and strategic direction actually lie, and what does that actually look like? And again, and I keep harping on about this, but like, if you don't have a digital trustee, like, what is this going to look like in your organisation? You need to have someone who's got that attitude.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Any other questions that people are thinking about just now? I was just going to go back a bit to something I'd highlighted in my chat, which was about like finances and budgeting and all that, because I think that is such a tricky area, because often the way organizations are set up is there's a relatively static way that they budget, and it can be hard to bring funding in to new places to do development. And like, you know, Ross gives the example of a bad approach to innovation is going and saying yes to somebody where the price tag's tens of thousands. You know, that's totally right, but equally you maybe do need to have strategies for saying, you know, how do we de-risk this and make sure that we're on the right track?
And quite often as well, it's about funding beyond the purchase. I go in so often, and I was working in a really large nationwide union last year, and I had to give a presentation to the top people that basically just said every investment you've ever made has made it to a test, and it's been running at a test since you did that. And quite often that was 5 years of like running as a test in public, and they've made no investment to improve it, to the point where actually it was becoming dangerous. So it's also about kind of making sure that there are those models and that governance in place to have a continual budget, to be able to have that product life cycle where you can make those improvements, because digital technology is a living thing. It needs to be fed, so to speak, and kept alive.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that goes back a bit to like doing your mini tests along the way, but then also having a sort of a final point where you say, are we going to double down and commit to this, or is it time to park it? And I guess often the temptation, and it goes back a bit to working culture, is we don't want to hit the stop button and say this isn't working, because often people have invested time and effort. But I think if you put your thinking in a different way and say, we'll test a few things and then stick with the ones that work, nobody's feeling, oh, that thing I was really committed to is getting parked. There's not the same sense of loss that you might experience if you felt, well, this is something I'm absolutely committed to.
Yeah, there is that whole thing about sunk cost and people not wanting to stop, but you know, you really do need to be cognizant of, like, is that just pouring more money into the hole? Because it's and it takes a bit of bravery sometimes to stop something like that. But I think actually as well, just Bobby just raised something in my head as well. The ongoing costs, absolutely, I think you do need to be careful about that. But I also think with any kind of digital purchase, I feel like, or any decision, the ensuring that the people in the organisation are going to be able to use it effectively is also something that has to be factored in. And that's, you know, that's about training, it's about development, it's about the education side of that has to be factored in, because otherwise, I mean, every industry is littered with stories of really what are classed as top products just being massively underutilized, people disappointed with them all over the place. And a lot of that is just down to the fact that there was poor education, poor training, poor handover. One other final point actually on the cost and budget side of it. I presume everybody here, if there are obviously certain organizations offer free software for, particularly to the third sector and so on. I presume everybody takes advantage of, where appropriate obviously, but takes advantage of what Microsoft or Google or various others are offering. And there are obviously lots of free versions of products and so on, but is that something that's widely used or taken advantage of?
Yeah, I think we've been kind of like over the last year kind of hammered at home to people that like get stuff for free or get it half price. I mean, that's it's just such a no-brainer. And also absolutely. Kind of when we're talking about costs, like that work that I'm doing with that housing association at the moment, and they're looking at, you know, it's like someone in the finance team's going, we can't afford these systems that you're talking about. And then you look at something like Breathe HR, and I think for a team of 50 people, like you get half price with charities, and it's like 25 quid a month, and you're like, why are we even having this chat? Why are we even having a chat about £25 a month when you're doing a manual printed payroll? How are we even having this conversation? For me, it's like people are not having conversations about what's the risk of not taking a risk. The risk of chugging along with the same crap time sink process. Is that's a much bigger risk to your organisation than trying the new thing that is a complete bloody no-brainer. It might require some tweaks or the training or the support or a culture change, but the thing that you've been doing for the last decade and a half and continuing to do that is a much bigger risk to the organisation than anything you're going to do.
Yeah, I agree. John, I'm probably going to have to step out. I have a board meeting starting at 11 o'clock actually.
No problem. Thank you very much, Raymond.
Listen, thank you very much for inviting me actually, and nice to meet you all. Hopefully I'll speak to you again.
Thanks, Raymond.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think William was going to come in because he unmuted.
Yes. Yeah, it was just really it's really just a reflection on how I think there's something about entrenched culture at our organization which makes change difficult, and that's because we're not people's very roles and their performance in their jobs isn't direct. Their pay isn't related to performance, it's related to their responsibilities, and so people hang on to responsibilities and build out own these processes and responsibilities and kind of gather and hoard these processes around them and kind of augment their roles. And I don't think it's necessarily always a conscious thing, but we don't have a performance related culture, and we don't consider the projects that we run and the services we provide as products, and so they don't have that product life cycle. They don't have that necessity to consider what the service level agreements are for good performance, either for people that in themselves, actually, that their roles and their how they perform their jobs, or the products that we provide. And so it's like it seems a bit daunting to take that on when you're thinking about, we need to shift, we need to restructure what we do for a service desk solution to be, which is what I'm currently considering, to be effective. We actually need to think about having a customer facing team. We need to pull in people from different areas for that to work. And it's it's a reflection on, is your culture actually in the right place to be able to make big change?
Yeah, it's good points, William. And I guess maybe another way to put the thought is there's a lot of kudos for keeping things the same, and what you really need is a bit of kudos and recognition for trying something new and stretching the way you do stuff. Because to me, the thing I keep coming back to at the moment is, given the pandemic, users' expectations are changing so much. So maybe let's take, for example, you're a small locally based counselling charity. You can be very confident that people will have tried some brand new digital services for the first time in the last 12 months. So they'll be asking themselves the question, why doesn't this organisation do something similar? And equally on the workforce front, because location is changing its level of importance now, people are going to say, well, I was able to work in different ways in this other organisation, so why can't I do it here? So is it, in that environment, just sticking with what you've always been doing is quite challenging. But I think one of the challenges is, if you go in like all guns blazing, you may get pushbacks. It's maybe about finding a few strands to kind of test on and show. That's the thing that the GDS always said, is kind of show the things, so demonstrate an example of how things could be. And quite often that's a good way of winning. It gives people an understanding of what you mean, because they maybe don't understand it in the abstract, but also you can say, well, look, we did try this and it did work. And that's often a quite good confidence builder.
Yeah, Bobby's just putting a good link actually to the blog post we wrote about what she learned from speaking to people at GDS. So it's a really good read. And then Tom Wismore's book as well, which, what the hell is it called?
Digital Transformation at Scale.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Useful. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Bobby. What would be your top lesson from that blog, to make people go and read it, would you say, Bobby?
Tell us the blog.
Go read the blog. It's great. There was a few things that I didn't include because there wasn't enough word count. And they were around getting the finance team on your side.
Oh my God.
So they kind of fit quite well into this topic, which is about kind of finding those allies that might not think that they're digital but will benefit the most. So those time saving and time equals cost, and also getting the kind of, if you've got legal or admin in your organization, getting them on side as well, because there's a lot of legal and compliance things that you're going to have some support over, and getting them to understand what it is you're trying to do and become an ally will help you further down the line, because quite often you'll be developing a CRM system or trying to embed an email marketing system, and then someone will come along and declare it's not GDPR compliant because they don't quite understand what you're trying to do. So it's about taking everyone on the journey, I think, was the main takeaway.
I cannot like emphasize that enough. Like, so there's a charity actually who I think we've done work with, John, but I'll not name them. Right, so they're quite big. They're based in Scotland, and so they switched, like a really bold move. They switched to Google G Suite from Microsoft products, and they've seen like huge efficiencies, massive cost saving in the products they're buying. People like staff liked it because they all knew how Android phones work, because that's what they had. Like, giving like staff a Windows phone. Why are charities still doing this? And so like the staff take up was great, the feedback from staff was great. The only people that didn't come on board were the finance team. And so everyone in this organization uses Google products to organize and collaborate and communicate and work with frontline service users. But the finance team still runs a Microsoft-based server in their office, all still use Windows machines. So there's like a whole organization, and then there's this tiny little bubble internally, the finance team, that just didn't come on board, and they weren't challenged. And you just don't want to end up, I mean, that's a slightly extreme example, but like Bobby's point is like, I cannot emphasize that enough. If you can't get your finance team or legal or anyone who's involved in those spheres on board, you're going to meet challenges further down the line. Like, you're going to do loads of work, it's going to hit a board, and then the finance director is going to be speaking at the board, and then suddenly the thing's not going to happen. Or the person who's the GDPR compliance officer is going to speak to the chief exec, and the thing's not going to happen. And you can put a lot of effort into something for it to be shot down at the final hurdle. Often actually like misunderstandings about what GDPR even is.
That's a really good point. I mean, I guess another way to think about it is like often people in a finance team or legal team, their experience is they don't get told anything and then get a surprise sprung on them. So it's not surprising that they dig the heels in and say, hang on a minute. So I think if you turn it around a bit and say, well, actually they're, you know, particularly if it's a payments thing, they're key users in this process because they have to handle the money as it comes in. So a bit of time up front can be helpful, but it is a long-term process, I think, because it's not just a question about how's this going to work, it's a question about how you work as a team as well, and that take a while to perfect, I'm sure. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts that we've not covered so far? William's made a really good point about some like quite important issues like PCI compliance, GDPR. You do need to sound those out a bit more formally. So making sure that you've got a sort of a good reference or evidence source for the way you're approaching it, rather than somebody says, oh, somebody in a forum said it was fine. So that's good. But that can also be helpful if you're putting that together as you're going along, because then if you get stakeholders who are saying, have we bottomed this out? You can say, yes, here's the documentation. But yeah. Any other questions or thoughts from the chat? Bobby, you mentioned frameworks and governance as being a good point to cover. And I suppose that's about really thinking about who's got what role in a project and who is
also really important when you're putting in a new system to kind of thinking about compliance, and like take GDPR for example. If you're putting in a new system that is a third-party tool, you're going to have some process to look at GDPR implications of that and looking at how that then fits into the system. I'm a big fan of mapping and having checklists for any kind of new digital product, and especially on the rollout side of things, because it can really help, especially when there's new staff being onboarded or people are taking over your role. I'm quite often the one that goes into the organization after someone's left and has to try and work out what the hell's gone on. The first thing I do is that mapping and those checklists. But yeah, that's something that I think everyone should start doing, please.
Yeah.
Alison Stone, who's been in these calls a few times to talk about cyber, like she gave some advice to work my cohort of Welsh charities, and it's really simple and it's really obvious, but it's just like baking in all that stuff at the start. So it's like you don't get really far down the road and then you go, oh, what about GDPR? You get really far and you go, oh, those servers in the United States. It's like you need to be baking in those conversations right at the start, not getting excited by some new shiny digital tool and then worrying about how secure it is or how safe your users are.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. So we kind of avoided GDPR as a kind of big topic in itself a bit today, because I think it is a slightly different area, but I think it can get raised as a showstopper, and I think the only way to avoid that is to have it in mind from the beginning and really bottom out what the real issues are, because it often gets held up as a big kind of red flag to say GDPR says no way, and actually you can do a fair amount as long as you do it properly. Just need to think about how you're approaching it. And also I think that for me the kind of bottom line is always, could you tell a user what you're doing with their data, where it's going, how you're approaching it? And if you can't do that, then you need to fix that. But yeah. Okay, so we're just a bit past the hour now, Ross. Do you want to wrap up shortly, or do you want to chat a bit more? I don't mind.
If anyone's got a final question, we can maybe take a final question, but if not, we can wrap up. I sent you a message because I looked on the SCVO events page and I realised that this event says it starts at 10 AM and finishes at 10 AM. So
oh really? That's
like
very efficient. Very, very short DigiShift.
I don't know how long we're here, but
did you blink?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Are there any final questions or thoughts are equally welcome?
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone. It's a really interesting chat.
Yeah, it's really good. Thanks, Bobby. I brought you in somehow as a guest as well, Bobby. I don't know how that happened. I apologise. You got to plug your blog, so that's good.
Yeah.
We got to see William's webcam, and I put
Yeah.
a link in as to how you can make a Canon DSLR. Do that. That's exciting. That's good.
It works very well until the battery runs out on a regular basis. You suddenly realise you need to keep filling the batteries.
Can you not just plug it in? Is that not a possible thing?
Not
so me and William will just have a chat about it.
Yeah. It gets a bit Heath Robinson after a bit. You suddenly realise this looks great for the first half an hour, and then you start to have issues.
Yeah. Good. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. We've got, what's our next one, John? Plug the next one.
The next one is in June, and it's also the last Wednesday of the month, and it's at 10 AM, but we run until 11 AM. And we got Paul de Gregorio, who's a very well-known digital comms guru and mobilizer. So he's going to be talking about ways that you can get lots of people doing things in the digital space. And that's on our website.
Cool. Yep. So if you go to the SCVO events page, you can book that one for free. And do please share it as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
Right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. See you later. Thank you.